So there is an intolerable trend, as we constantly hear about, of child mutilations, chemical castrations, surgical alterations in the name of trans ideology. We, of course, find these things objectionable. They are the evidence that they treat underlying gender dysphoria is scarce to the point of non-existence.
Yep.
And we would very much like to see that no longer exist. Unfortunately, there are, I'm happy to report, multiple states and countries which seem to be preventing this on the legislative level. There are outright bans of child gender transition surgeries and cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers. And so I'm going to go through the places that are doing that today, and hopefully some developments that are happening in the UK eventually as well, and how the people on the ground that are pushing this can learn from this, and we can take our wins where we can get them. Like, it's a sad standard that we have to consider protecting children at this level a win now, but
given the alternative, it's definitely a win.
Yes. So I wanted to do an update. So as you know, that Florida was one of the first states to do this, to Ron DeSantis' credit. As of yesterday, 2 days ago now, perhaps, so there was his gender-affirming care bill, air quotes, has been blocked by a Clinton appointee judge. So Robert L. Hinkle of Federal District Court in Tallahassee ruled specifically that 3 transgender children, with cases brought by their parents, can be prescribed puberty blockers despite Ron DeSantis' new state law. Quote, "Gender identity is real," Judge Hinkle wrote, adding that proper treatment can include medical health therapy followed by puberty blockers and hormone treatments. You see how the mental health therapy is only going in the direction of affirmation and then surgical and medical interventions.
Yeah.
So, Florida has adopted a statute and rules that prohibit these treatments even when medically appropriate. This is the point.
I'm not sure it is medically appropriate. That's
exactly
the question.
So one of the families involved in this litigation has a child as young as 8 years old.
I have an 8-year-old son.
Yeah. And
it would not be happening.
No. A just society would place these children in protective custody and place their abusive parents in actual custody, but unfortunately one of the features of the devolution of powers in the US is that things do get stuck up in the courts, and this is a hurdle that must be overcome. But let's look at a map from ABC News as to which states and places in the US have placed bans on what they call gender-affirming care. Genital lobotomies. This is 18 states now, so Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Utah, and 14 other states are considering or have already tried to introduce similar bills that block in part or in whole quote-unquote gender-affirming care.
I'm sorry just to my Texan friends, but purple state, that's all I'm saying.
We'll get into the exact details of what's happened in Texas, because that is, again, the courts and not necessarily the legislature, because Greg Abbott, who is usually quite tepid, is actually doing something quite good on this. He's just being obstructed by appointed but unelected.
But this is a great map, though, right?
Yeah.
What I like about this map is it may as well be a map of the moral versus immoral states of the United States.
And the color code is inverted. So for our audio listeners, the states which have gender-affirming care are in green, whereas the ones that have banned what they call gender-affirming youth care are in a deep red, and it corresponds, ironically enough, with the particular parties that are governing these states. So, something to point out here, to the Americans, that's 32 states in total. Now, not all of those 14 are going to have their legislation likely to be passed, because their local state legislature is governed by the Democrats, so the legislation has been brought forward. But this is now a majority of states that are pushing back against this.
Excellent.
The Overton window really has shifted in favour of protecting children, so it's exhausting. But
crazy. Just Americans, should you protect your children? You know, a third of the states are like, well, it's not on our watch.
It's depressing.
California and New York.
It's equally depressing that we even have to keep talking about this, but the continual keeping up of the pressure is what's changing the conversation. So sometimes it can feel a bit tiring. Again, it's useful to take stock and see how far we have actually come. And when I say we, I am, of course, lending credence to the people that have been really pushing the needle on this, like Matt Walsh and all the folks at Daily Wire and the like. So well done, everyone. There's a quote from this article as well. Supporters of the bans argue that transgender people should wait until they're legally adults before making these decisions.
Crazy.
Imagine the horror.
Absolutely crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
As if.
So let's go to the Daily Wire's reporting on this as to which states and why have their different reasons. Just a quick breakdown. So Florida, Utah, Iowa, Mississippi, Tennessee, South Dakota, Indiana, Idaho, West Virginia, and Kentucky have all banned puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries for minors. So they've gone the full spectrum. Florida, as I've already said, have had that influx as of the last couple of days. Alabama tried to ban everything, but again, a federal court blocked the puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones part, but the gender surgeries remains in effect.
Okay.
And
that's something.
Yeah. Again, we'll get onto shortly how the puberty blockers have zero scant evidence as well, and they're just as bad as the surgeries, weirdly enough.
Well, they render you infertile, and you have a massively increased chance of like osteoporosis and other things like that.
Yes, and also because the way your hormones interact develop your cognition, you don't get out of the state of arrested development of prolonged adolescence. So technically speaking, you wouldn't be able to consent to the later surgeries if we were doing it on a cognition basis rather than an arbitrary age basis. Yeah. And so they permanently impair you mentally. So they're horrible. They're evil things. Arizona's only banned the surgeries.
Just as a quick thing. Sorry. Weren't these drugs used to sterilize?
We'll get onto that.
Oh.
Yes, we have a detailed report from Wall Street Journal that came out this morning, funnily enough. Arizona also banned the surgeries, but they kept the puberty blockers and hormone access in place. So that wasn't because a federal court blocked it. That's because Doug Ducey's pretty much useless, and now he's gone. We've got Katie Hobbs, a Democrat, so that'll probably go out the way. Georgia banned the hormones and the surgeries, but not the puberty blockers for some reason. Thank you, Brian Kemp. Arkansas had their ban blocked by a federal court. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, however, President Trump's former White House spokesperson, who's now the governor there, has added another law in that makes it easier to file malpractice lawsuits against doctors who provide gender treatments to minors.
Always good.
So that means they're so liable to being sued that the amount of surgeries will go down, and hopefully the insurance companies, particularly with the new expose that Matt Walsh has done as well, where they've exposed that WPATH letters fast-track people who aren't even gender dysphoric to get gender surgeries. Yep. Hopefully that means that they won't be covered enough where the practice will shut down de facto. But that's happening sort of in the UK, so we'll get onto that a little bit later. An Austin judge blocked the Texas directive from Governor Greg Abbott to have the Department of Family and Protective Services investigate parents subjecting their children to abusive gender transitioning procedures. So he said, have the law enforcement step in, monitor the situation, take the kids away from their parents if they're trying to socially or medically transition them. And the federal court stepped in and said, no, you can't do that.
Right.
So if, again, any other practice like force-feeding a child drugs or sexually abusing them, you would think that law enforcement would intervene, and they absolutely should, but for the special exemption of trans ideology, they don't have to step in. So, again, that's not the fault of the Texas legislature, it's the courts. In Ohio, a bill was introduced in February to ban puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and gender surgeries. The bill also says that children must be screened for abuse and comorbidities, mental, before being diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Nebraska, North, and South Carolina have bills to ban puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries for minors that just haven't passed yet. And New Jersey, Michigan, Oregon, and Hawaii have bills proposing to ban all three procedures. But of course, they're Democrat strongholds, so they're unlikely to pass. But good on the Republicans in the state legislature for at least trying to propose this and move the conversation along. And to show you the manipulative framing of how this is being spun by the corporate press, I thought I'd go to this one. Because recently, this was in West Virginia. This is the governor, Jim Justice. Great name. And this is Wednesday at the time of writing. Scroll down, please, John, just so I can get the date right. This was on late March. He signed a bill banning, quote, gender-affirming care for minors. The bill outlaws those under 18 being prescribed hormone therapy and this is what they say, fully reversible puberty blockers.
Total lie.
It is. It also bans minors from receiving gender-affirming surgery, something physicians say doesn't even happen in West Virginia.
Then it doesn't matter if it's being banned, does it?
Yes. But it's not happening, but it should happen, and it's a good thing, is their logic.
If it's not happening, then it's no problem to ban it.
Yes.
And what are you complaining about?
And just speaking on what you've already said about the idea that puberty blockers are fully reversible. Number one, no. Abigail Schreier documents this very well in Irreversible Damage. But we also have this Wall Street Journal article that was published today that I thought summarized the evidence in a way that would provide a good source rather than me just talking off the top of my head. But it's all pretty disturbing. So, did you know, the Department of Health and Human Services has claimed that puberty blockers are reversible. This omits the evidence that quote, by impeding the usual process of sexual orientation and gender identity development, these drugs effectively lock in children and young people to a treatment pathway, according to a report by the NHS, which cites studies finding that 96 to 98% of minors prescribed puberty blockers proceed to cross-sex hormones. It's an inexorable journey. If you put them on one, they're going to have a sunk cost to then buy into the other, because they've been told that this is the only route to feeling better about themselves.
And at the end of the day, you've kind of already screwed up their biology as well.
Yes.
So now you only have one way forward.
Yeah, you're only committed to the position. And when it comes to its fruition with the cross-sex surgery, and you're still not the man or woman you wanted to be because you have the memories of who you were, it's no wonder that these people tragically have such a high suicide rate. The FDA in 2016 ordered AbbVie to add a warning label that children on Lupron might develop new or intensified psychiatric problems.
Oh, wow, really?
So it actually induces further mental comorbidities. So not only does it impair brain development and inhibit your ability to consent to things later in life, such as the surgeries, which I don't think you can consent to anyway, but that's another conversation, but it also might add additional mental health complications. Also, the FDA has approved these medications to treat prostate cancer, endometriosis, certain types of infertility, and a rare childhood disease called genetic mutation, caused by genetic mutation. So that's precocious puberty and things like that.
Right.
Did you know they've never approved them for gender dysphoria?
I did not know that.
The FDA has never licensed chemical castration drugs, puberty blockers, for treatment of gender dysphoria. And this is because the Dutch study didn't find that either. The Dutch study that everyone based it on didn't treat for suicidality. It treated whether or not they worked. But it's simply been transposed as the go-to evidence for why you should treat it with puberty blockers. The drugs, led by AbbVie's Lupron, are prescribed to minors off-label. In a bracket, they're also used off-label for chemical castration of repeat sex offenders. So we are treating children with the same punishment as the paedophiles that prey on them.
I just... Oh, God. It's just... You know, I've been preparing a hangout to do behind the paywall, because there's no way we could put this outside of the paywall, which is just looking directly at the effects of all of these things.
Yeah, I've been researching it for quite a while.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of things that are just the most horrific things. I'm probably going to call it hell on earth or something like that, because going through this is just awful.
Yes, if you have not selected someone to sit on that, I'm more than happy to contribute.
Yeah, we can definitely do it.
Because it's harrowing. They also found that the Centre for Investigative Reporting revealed in 2017, bear in mind, 2017 was before these were widely used as gender-affirming care drugs, that women taking Lupron experienced 10,000 adverse events reports when they were children.
Jesus.
So that's a horrific high rate of adverse event reports. And also we know that increases risk of infertility, cancer, osteoporosis, and other lifelong debilitating conditions. So the idea this is being given to children is evil. That's
it's literally
all there is
used
to it.
as a sterilization drug.
Yes. Yes.
For criminals.
Yeah. So back to the individual states. Montana's going even further than just banning this. So they've also banned TikTok.
Oh, very based.
As a vector of transmission for trans ideology, and also because they've complained, of course, that ByteDance is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party, and so they've been stealing your data.
And we also know that they're specifically tailoring the Western algorithm differently to the Chinese algorithm.
Yes, yeah. I believe the Chinese algorithm is more educational, whereas the Western algorithm is more geared towards ideology.
Yes.
Because they understand that this is a demoralization tactic.
Yes, and for anyone who doesn't remember, the Chinese Communist Party is the party of Mao, who have been engaging in a 100-year-long ideological war with the West.
Yes.
So don't forget, these are our enemies.
Yeah, they're outsourcing a cultural revolution to us and laughing as we commit suicide. Quite literally, unfortunately. So users and ByteDance have actually brought a lawsuit against this. So again, this is something that's being held up in the US courts. So don't blame your legislature. They are taking action. It's just judicial activists. They said, by banning TikTok, a forum that plaintiffs and hundreds of thousands of individuals in Montana use to engage in constitutionally protected speech, the TikTok ban unlawfully abridges one of the core freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment, attorneys for the company wrote in their complaint. So the complaint is mainly on the grounds, the legislation, that it collects data from users and devices from the Chinese Communist Party, and the complaint against it is that by taking this platform down, you're stifling our free speech. They're not
the free speech of the Chinese Communist Party. Exactly.
So they're not going to prevent another platform from snapping up the same function. Yeah, but not even content. It's the way in which TikTok distributes its content in the 30-second videos. If Instagram did the same thing, even though Instagram has since from the Wall Street Journal expose been exposed as a trap of pedophiles as well, seems to be a thing of image-based platforms. But if Instagram did the same thing, they wouldn't shut down Instagram for the same reasons, because Instagram even though it acts probably in the interest of the Chinese Communist Party, is not owned by them.
Yeah.
But the byproduct of banning TikTok is that it slows down the spread of gender ideology. Because it used to be on Tumblr, and now it's definitely on TikTok. And Montana also decided just to define a woman in their legislation.
Oh, really?
Because that's something that we need to do in 2023. They said, in human beings, there are exactly two sexes, male and female, with corresponding types of gametes, states the law, previously known as Senate Bill 458. The law states that a female is someone who, under normal development, has XX chromosomes and produces or would produce relatively large, relatively immobile gametes, or eggs, during her life cycle, and has a reproductive and endocrine system oriented around the production of those gametes.
That's obviously true.
The only issue with this
Go on.
is that Republican Senator Carl Glim, who is the primary sponsor of the bill, said the bill is necessary because sex and gender should not be used interchangeably in Montana code. That would be sensible in the law. His direct quote, though, is, "Gender is obviously something different than biological sex."
I hate to say it, but they're right about that. Gender
okay.
is the expression, the social expression of biological sex.
But it's anchored to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's completely conceptually anchored to the physical reality, the biological reality of men and women, males and females. But the attack will be, well, they are obviously actually different things. One can be male without being a man, one can be female without being a woman. And that's true. That's what boy and girl mean. So they are right on that, and we need to be aware of it.
The rest of the quote, though, is, "Biological sex is immutable. You can't change it. There are only two biological sexes," implying that gender is itself mutable and not binary, which is a problem of framing. He seems to have absorbed the sort of 2015 position.
No, but the problem is gender is mutable. The expression of your masculinity does change.
But not outside the binary biological sex paradigm.
I agree.
So that's why they need better framing, is my critique.
They definitely do.
Yes.
But they're not wrong at all in what they've said there. So
it's a set of social associations to your biological sex, and you can perform the role of man or woman less or more corresponding to your sex. But the issue is he has left an open goal to say, if gender is mutable, then I can take myself outside the sex paradigm.
He does need to stress that it is anchored and built upon the biology.
Yes. Alabama have done the same thing as well. So the Health Committee voted along party lines to approve the What is a Woman Act. I just like how that's become...
Well done, Matt Walsh.
It's become a meme.
Yeah.
Like, and not in a joke way. It's that it's been taken up and ran with.
Yeah.
And send the legislation to the full House of Representatives. The bill defines a female and woman as an individual whose biological reproductive system is designed to produce ova, and a male and man as an individual whose biological reproductive system is designed to fertilize the ova of a female. The bill states that it is important to distinguish between the sexes with respect to athletics, prisons, or other detention facilities, domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers, locker rooms, bathrooms, and other areas. Carl Marion D. Anderson Harvey, Alabama State Director Human Rights Campaign, in a statement on Wednesday called the bill the LGBTQ Erasure Act.
Okay.
Well, no. Again, hate to sound like the LGB Alliance here, but the TQ plus are grafted onto the former acronym, because the former acronym concerns sexuality and relies on a biological recognition of appendages relating to men and women, because if you're same-sex attracted, you're attracted to the same sex, and so the TQ plus undermines the former, and so no, it's not the LGBTQ plus Erasure Act, it's just the TQ plus doesn't make any sense Act, and that would be quite sensible.
I'm beyond even arguing that, if you think that's fine. You're a lunatic. You're a lunatic who wants to chop their chin-ups.
Yeah, I know. This is the thing. We can't come together with the people that want to lop the breasts of a 16-year-old girl. There is no reconciling this position.
Yeah, I just don't agree with you on anything here.
Montana have also banned Drag Queen Story Hour.
Oh, good.
Again, just shutting down the transmission vectors. Yeah. They are the third state to enact a law surrounding drag performers, which is HB 359, which defines them as male or female performers who adopt a flamboyant or parodic feminine and male persona with glamorous or exaggerated costumes and makeup. Minors are prohibited from attending drag shows on public property. Businesses that violate the law could face a fine anywhere between $1,000 and $5,000 for the first offence, between $2,500 and $5,000 for the second offence, and $10,000 for the third offence, with a 10-year statutory limit. Schools and libraries would be fined $5,000 for each story hour heard.
So they could have been slightly more nuanced on this, because there are going to be people who say, well, what about something like Widow Twanky? And I'm like,
dames.
Yeah, exactly, pantomime dames. Yeah, that's true. And there's an obvious substantive difference between a pantomime dame and the highly sexualized performances that we have seen videos of in strip clubs or wherever of this. But at the end of the day, if you're not prepared to concede that there's that distinction, then it's all got to go.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah,
I don't want to ban Widow Twanky and pantomime, but
if you guys are going to make the conflation as a Trojan horse to get close to children,
exactly,
I'm fine with panto just not being.
Then it just goes. And,
Yep.
and you've ruined it. That's what it comes to.
Yes. Tennessee have tried to do the same thing, but they've suffered a setback. Again, judicial activists. So the judge has blocked the Tennessee law. This time it was a Trump appointee.
Right. Okay.
So he has blocked it on the most obtuse liberal standard imaginable. So he said in Tennessee, he's blocked the law intended to protect children from being exposed to adult cabaret performances.
Yep.
The law creates an offence for a person who engages in adult cabaret performances on public property or in a location where the adult cabaret performance could be viewed by a person who is not an adult. The definition of adult cabaret performance in the law includes male or female impersonators. The US District Judge, Thomas Parker, issued a temporary injunction against the law because he said it was too vague and could be a violation of the First Amendment. The law came before Parker after Friends of George, a self-described LGBTQ theatre company based in Memphis, filed a suit challenging the law. So he was saying the definition of obscenity here is too broad. I would suggest that we know what we see. And also, there are certain acts which are not speech. This is the problem I have with the Free Speech Coalition. Is someone who represents the porn industry in obscenity cases, and I think there's a definitional difference between expression and speech, because there are certain acts that you couldn't do in Times Square and get away with legally versus shouting in Times Square.
Yeah,
and this should be one of them, I would suggest. So,
well, I mean, just. It shouldn't be outside of the bounds of normality and decency to ban sexual acts or acts that are imitating sexual acts in public spaces so children aren't exposed to them.
Yes, and that's not a free speech issue. I wouldn't.
No, I don't. I think it's a decency issue.
No, so this is an annoying thing that this person's done, but again, things are being changed slowly on the state level, and I would like to say as well, credit to Matt Walsh and James Lindsay specifically, because they had input on this original law. And this was where James Lindsay first raised the spectre of the drag pedagogy paper that I've gone through before. So more awareness is being brought to this. And because more awareness is being brought to this, go on to this one, the Human Rights Campaign, the people responsible for the Corporate Equality Index that convinced Anheuser-Busch to hire Dylan Mulvaney, the largest LGBT lobby in the world, have declared a state of emergency.
Good.
Well, I think it's hilarious. They think they can act like a government. But, of course, all of the largest hedge funds and international institutions have given them that power to strong arm.
State of emergency, we might not be able to transition children or expose them to horrific shows. Okay.
Yes. Or indecent acts on pride floats. I mean, it was quite funny. So DeSantis...
While that's the emergency for them.
Yeah, well, back to your thing of when DeSantis said we should give child sex offenders a death penalty, and they said that's transphobic.
Yeah.
What an odd thing to say. The idea that when DeSantis bans public sexual acts and then Pride in Florida say we have to shut it down because there might be children present.
What were you doing all along?
Say.
Yeah.
So state of emergency because you can't be sexual around children. Right. Very strange. So let's jump continents to Norway and Sweden. So Josh will be covering a little bit more of this on a weekend segment on Sunday, going into the details of each country, specifically France, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, a little bit of the UK. But I thought we'd just touch on this a little bit. And this is from Dr. Deborah So, whose book The End of Gender Harry and I plan on covering soon. And she writes, last week the Norwegian Healthcare Investigation Board announced it would be revising its current guidelines regarding so-called gender-affirming care for minors. The use of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and transition-related surgery would be restricted to research contexts and no longer provided in clinical settings. Now, there is an issue here, because it sounds to me much like the lack of substantive evidence is why they have rescinded this. Good. But it means that they will still be conducting clinical trials to try and fabricate the evidence under the false premise that this will treat gender dysphoria, even though the idea that you can change sex is itself an incorrect premise, and so no treatment based on that premise will ever help someone.
Right.
So they'll still be conducting it in clinical trials, but fortunately, lots of children will be spared these exercises because they'll no longer be used as an intervention to ameliorate their gender dysphoria for the general population. So that's a positive development. The Netherlands, France, Sweden, and Finland have all likewise reviewed the Dutch protocol, and they've said what I said a little while ago, which is it doesn't actually address suicidality. It just confirms that puberty's blockers work. And one participant during the Dutch protocol died from surgery complications later on. Are you not familiar with this?
No, but it's fine.
Yeah. So,
Time.
we'll
talk about it another time.
Yeah, that's totally fine. So it cites the UK here as well.
Yeah.
Just so we know, if we move on to the next one, Josh has already covered the fact that the Tavistock Clinic has not quite closed. If you scroll down to there we go. They got a stay of execution until about August. So they will still be operating, even though they were told to discontinue their operations because of the likes of the CAS report.
Yeah.
So for commentators, I know Tim's brought this up before, Tim Paul, Jordan Peterson, they haven't quite discontinued it as we'd hoped, but hopefully that continues going on. Speaking of Tavistock in the UK, the Telegraph came out recently and found out that Mermaids were setting the guidelines for Tavistock.
Oh, were they?
Yes, they were directly involved. So Susie Green, the chairman of charity Mermaids at the time, was part of a task group reviewing services at the Tavistock and Portman Clinic. The service specification outlines the treatment for children. Transgender children, they say, included details on how hormone blockers will now be considered for any child under 12. Miss Green, who works for Gender GP, an online service which prescribes cross-sex hormones, had taken her own child, who was born male, to the US for puberty blockers before their 16th birthday. On their 16th birthday, she took them to Thailand for cross-sex surgery. So,
what's the dad think of it?
No mention of him being in the picture.
Weird, that.
Yes, as we know from Jeff Younger and other people, the Canadian fella featured in What is a Woman, it is usually the devouring borderline personality disorder manifesting mothers taking their children away from the fathers who desperately do not want them to be castrated. The Tavistock claimed that it did not have emails or minutes of meetings with Miss Green. But after the information regulator threatened court action, it released more than 300 pages showing Miss Green had direct contact with Dr. Polly Carmichael, Tavistock's director, and demanded to be regarded as a professional so she could refer children herself to treatment when their GPs refused. Miss Green has no formal medical training. She held an advisory role on 2 of the studies that the clinic was involved in on the long-term effect of gender identity. So they're just lying to mutilate children. In 2018, the NHS updated the informed consent section to state that age alone does not determine capacity to give consent. I would agree. I don't think anyone of any age can consent to this, specifically if puberty blockers impair their mental development. But you don't think that. Instead, you think that children should be able to consent. If it is concluded that a client has sufficient autonomy and understanding of what is to be offered, plus other key eligibility and readiness criteria have been met, they can consent to the treatment. We already know that WPATH has pre-scripted letters to give to transgender clinicians, to give to insurance providers in the US that say, I have gender dysphoria, therefore I need the treatment, even if you have not had a formal diagnosis of gender dysphoria yet. Matt Walsh exposed that this week. The involvement with the service specification came as Mermaids were putting pressure on the Tavistock to lower the age for cross-sex hormones to 14, Dr. Carmichael revealed in an interview at the time. So, as we spoke about yesterday with Childline and the like, we have a deeply entrenched ideological NGO class interfering with the medical establishment and harming children. Now, fortunately, public opinion has been against this. The Guardian are crying about the fact that less than half of Britons support LGBT trans-affirming child therapies. They placed 28th on a list of 30 countries for people agreeing that teenagers with parental consent should be able to access gender-affirming care. Only Hungary, which has banned the process since 2020, and the US, because of various states already mentioned, recorded lower levels of support than Britain's 47%. And a good bit of news.
47% of people in Britain?
Yes.
God, that's disgraceful.
I think they are yet to understand what this surgery
they probably have
does.
no idea what they're talking about.
Which is why Matt Walsh has been very effective in raising this issue. And for example, my own dad last year thought, oh, there must be people in the wrong body. You just think it's weird, so you're against it. This year, he's turned around and gone, no, after everything that you said, after your interview with Ritchie, I've changed my mind. What they're doing to these people is barbarous. It's medieval torture. And speaking of Richie Herron, if you'd like to go over to our website, you can watch my interview with him. It's free, but of course, we are demonetized and on YouTube. So if you'd like to pay us £5 a month, we can continue bringing in guests like this. And
this was a harrowing interview as well, man.
It is one of the saddest experiences, I think, of my life, and it doesn't even come close to what Richie's been through. And I'm glad to call Richie a friend offline now, and I really hope he does better. But everything he went through, utterly avoidable, and there is blood on the hands of his now dead physician and everyone that pushed him along this path. Yeah. And congratulations to him for dedicating his life to trying to stop this ever happening to anyone else. And there are some positive developments on this front, because Richie in the Wild has had something in the works. He's launching a judicial review against the UK's adult gender clinics, as well as the child transition services. The aim is to challenge the failure of the NHS to provide appropriate treatment and safeguards for adults suffering from gender dysphoria. So, Paul Cawthrain, who I believe is involved in the legislation, he is filing a notice to the UK Secretary of Health, which is Steve Barclay, and Minister for Women and Equalities, which is Kemi Badenoch, informing them of the action, and they're awaiting a response within 2 weeks. It's filed in conjunction with the father of a 21-year-old autistic man who has redacted his identity, who has been booked in for imminent genital removal surgery at an adult gender clinic. So, despite him having the comorbidities of autism and probable depression and the like, much like Ritchie, who also had autism and OCD, he is going to have his testicles removed. That's just harrowing. And if we go to the last one, this is their sort of crowdfunding website, and it gives more details on their case. The legal team is being represented by Jeremy Hyam KC, the person who represented and won Kira Bell's case against Tavistock. And it says, we're bringing a judicial review against the service specifications maintained by the NHS, which determine the treatment which adults who suffer with gender dysphoria are given. Currently, they don't require psychological involvement, so they don't require a psych assessment. If you have gender dysphoria, you can just be pushed along the inexorable path. They require clinicians to affirm the young person's belief about gender identity. We're also asking that the CAS review is extended to cover young people to the age of 25 years old. Obviously, the threshold for when your brain is fully formed. And again, some wiggle room about whether or not people with mental comorbidities at any age can consent to this, but that conversation will be had down the road. And you can donate and sign up to their email list for updates here. So I thought I'd just provide you an update, a positive development on some of the legislative efforts that are going against this horrible trend, which is damaging children and vulnerable adults. There, of course, should never be another Kiri Bell, Richie Herron, Chloe Cole, and well done to everyone who is working to assure that that is the case.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Symposium series, this episode on debating secular ethics. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.